A small crowd gathered outside Cartier's Beverly Hills flagship store, phones raised to capture the unthinkable scene unfolding through the store's crystal-clear windows. Inside, Hollywood's beloved Sandra Bullock stood frozen at the diamond counter, her face flushed with embarrassment as the store's owner demanded she leave immediately. Her comfortable Nike hoodie and worn jeans had already drawn disapproving glances, but no one expected what came next. The owner's voice carried through the store, dripping with disdain as she declared that this wasn't a place for window shopping or pretending to be something you're not. Just as security approached to escort Sandra out, a familiar figure pushed through the growing crowd outside. Keanu Reeves, dressed as casually as Sandra in his signature black jacket, was about to turn this humiliating moment into an unforgettable lesson about true worth and the price of judgment. The next 5 minutes would not only transform everyone's view of Sandra Bullock but would teach a lesson about class that no amount of money could buy. On a bright Tuesday morning, Cartier's Beverly Hills boutique sparkled under the California sun, its windows displaying breathtaking jewelry that caught every passerby's eye. The store, nestled among luxury fashion houses on Rodeo Drive, represented everything exclusive about Beverly Hills. Pristine marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and display cases that held dreams made of diamonds and platinum. Victoria Montgomery, the store's owner, stood behind the main counter in her perfectly tailored Chanel suit. Her reputation for catering to Hollywood's elite made her boutique the go-to destination for celebrities preparing for red carpet events. She prided herself on identifying valuable customers at first glance, a skill she perfected over 20 years in luxury retail. The store's peaceful morning shattered when the front door opened, bringing in a burst of warm air and a woman dressed in a way Victoria considered completely inappropriate for her establishment. The customer wore a worn Nike hoodie, faded jeans, and old running shoes. Her face partially hidden under a baseball cap, she moved quietly toward the engagement ring section. Sandra Bullock hadn't planned on visiting Cartier that morning. She'd been jogging in Beverly Hills when her sister called, reminding her about finding a wedding gift for their cousin's upcoming ceremony. The store had been right there, and Sandra, never one to stand on ceremony, decided to stop in. As Sandra approached the counter, Victoria's perfectly manicured hand tightened around her Mont Blanc pen. Other customers, dressed appropriately in designer wear, turned to stare at the casual intruder. A young sales associate stepped forward to help, but Victoria quickly intercepted, her Louboutin heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The tension in the air thickened as Victoria positioned herself between Sandra and the display case, her eyes scanning Sandra's outfit with obvious disapproval. The morning sun streaming through the windows highlighted every crease in Sandra's well-worn hoodie, creating a stark contrast against the store's opulent interior. Other customers pretended to browse while watching the scene unfold, their whispers echoing off the store's pristine walls. A group of well-dressed women near the watch section exchanged knowing looks, their judgment of Sandra's appearance clear in their expressions. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything Victoria thought she knew about class and worth. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand slammed down on the glass counter, making nearby customers jump. "I've had enough of this charade," she announced, her voice echoing through the store. "Security, please escort this person out. We can't have people wasting our time pretending they can afford things clearly beyond their means." The security guard hesitated, his training conflicting with Victoria's demands. Sandra stood motionless, her calm demeanor unchanged despite the escalating situation. A small crowd had begun to gather outside the store's windows, drawn by Victoria's raised voice and theatrical gestures. "You know," Victoria continued, pacing behind the counter like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument, "I've spent 20 years building this store's reputation. 20 years of serving Hollywood's finest, and I can spot a fake from a mile away." She paused, adjusting her Cartier bracelet with deliberate precision. The real Sandra Bullock was in here just last month, dripping in Versace. She wouldn't be caught dead in. She waved her hand dismissively at Sandra's attire, whatever this is supposed to be. The young sales associate, Emily, stepped forward nervously. "Mrs. Montgomery, perhaps we should dash," but Victoria cut her off with a sharp look. The tension in the store had reached a breaking point, with other customers either edging toward the door or pressing themselves against display cases to avoid being drawn into the confrontation. A well-dressed woman in her 60s, clutching her Hermes bag, whispered loudly to her companion, "I told you standards were slipping in Beverly Hills. Next thing you know, they'll be letting in tourists off the street." Her words carried across the hushed store, encouraging Victoria further. Sandra finally spoke, her voice steady and clear. "I understand you're trying to protect your store's reputation, but you might want to reconsider your approach to judging people." Her words seemed to bounce off Victoria's armor of prejudice and designer clothing. "Oh, she speaks." Victoria's laugh was sharp and artificial. "And now she's giving me business advice. Tell me, what's your expertise in luxury retail?" "Target." "Walmart." Several customers snickered, though others looked increasingly uncomfortable with the display of cruelty. Outside, the crowd had grown larger, phones recording through the windows. Victoria, caught up in her performance, failed to notice the ripple of excitement that suddenly passed through the onlookers. Inside, she continued her tirade, moving from behind the counter to stand directly in front of Sandra. "Let me make this absolutely clear," Victoria's voice dripped with condescension. "This is not a place for people playing dress-up. This is not a store where you can come in, waste our time, and pretend to be something you're not." She gestured toward the door. "The Hollywood tour buses are that way. Perhaps you can find someone there who'll believe your little impersonation act." The security guard had begun moving forward, his discomfort evident in every step. Emily, the sales associate, had tears in her eyes, her hands trembling as she arranged already perfectly aligned jewelry boxes. The store's atmosphere had become unbearably tense, like a stretched rubber band about to snap. Just then, a commotion outside caught everyone's attention. The crowd parted like waves, and through the glass doors, a familiar figure appeared. Victoria, still focused on Sandra, missed the collective gasp from her audience. Her final words hung in the air like smoke before a fire. "I know every A-list celebrity in Hollywood, and you, my dear imposter, are definitely not Sandra Bullock." The store's door chimed, announcing a new arrival. Victoria turned, her rehearsed greeting freezing on her lips as Keanu Reeves stepped into her carefully curated world of luxury and prejudice. The moment stretched like pulled taffy, sweet with anticipation of what would happen next. Victoria stood frozen, her perfectly composed facade cracking as Keanu Reeves strode into the store. His presence, though casual in his trademark black jacket and jeans, commanded immediate attention. The security guard stepped back, recognition dawning on his face. The other customers, who moments ago had been part of Victoria's eager audience, now pressed themselves against the walls, trying to disappear into the expensive wallpaper. "Sandy," Keanu's warm voice cut through the tension. "I thought I recognized you through the window. Didn't expect to run into you here." He moved toward Sandra with the easy grace that had charmed audiences worldwide, completely ignoring Victoria's presence. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her carefully applied lipstick suddenly feeling like a garish mask. The reality of her mistake crashed over her like a tidal wave as she watched Keanu embrace Sandra warmly. The crowd outside the store had doubled, their phones capturing every moment of her humiliation. "I was just trying to look at a necklace for Maria's wedding," Sandra explained to Keanu, her voice carrying the same warmth it had maintained throughout Victoria's tirade. "But it seems there's been some confusion about whether I belong here." Victoria's hands began to tremble, causing her extensive collection of designer bracelets to clash together like wind chimes in a storm. Emily, the young sales associate, had pressed her hand to her mouth, tears now freely rolling down her cheeks as she watched the scene unfold. "Mrs. Montgomery," Emily's voice quivered as she addressed her boss. "That's really Sandra Bullock. I tried to tell you earlier." Her words trailed off as Victoria shot her a look that could freeze mercury. The well-dressed woman who had made the comment about standards now clutched her Hermes bag like a shield, attempting to inch toward the door without being noticed. Her companion had already managed to slip outside, leaving her to face the consequences of their shared snobbery alone. Keanu turned to Victoria, his expression kind but firm. "I couldn't help overhearing your comments about knowing every A-list celebrity in Hollywood." His voice carried no anger, which somehow made it worse. "I find it interesting that you didn't recognize one of its most beloved actresses, standing right in front of you." Victoria's perfectly maintained composure crumbled completely. Her face, usually set in a mask of superiority, now displayed a rapidly cycling slideshow of emotions: shock, embarrassment, horror, and desperation. The security guard had removed his cap and was staring at his shoes, probably calculating how this incident would affect his employment. The crowd outside had grown so large that passing cars on Rodeo Drive had begun to slow down, causing a traffic jam of rubbernecking luxury vehicles. Through the windows, people pressed their faces against the glass, phones recording every excruciating moment of Victoria's downfall. I didn't." Victoria stuttered, her usual eloquence deserting her like rats from a sinking ship. She reached out toward Sandra, her hand shaking. "Miss Bullock, I had no idea. If I had known." "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" Keanu's voice remained gentle but carried an undertone of steel. "You didn't know. But you decided to judge anyway. To humiliate someone based on their appearance. To assume you knew their worth by looking at their clothes." The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to dim, as if nature itself was providing mood lighting for this moment of reckoning. Victoria's designer suit, which had felt like armor minutes ago, now seemed to shrink around her, transforming from a symbol of power into a costume that fooled no one. Sandra, who had maintained her dignity throughout the entire ordeal, finally turned to face Victoria directly. The store owner flinched under her gaze, expecting the anger she knew she deserved. But Sandra's expression held something far worse than anger. It held pity. The store's atmosphere had transformed completely. The very air seemed to vibrate with tension as everyone waited to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve. Victoria Montgomery, who had spent decades building her reputation as the gatekeeper of Beverly Hills luxury, stood exposed as something far less impressive. A person who had confused the price tags on clothing with the value of the human wearing them. As silence gripped the store, Keanu gently placed his hand on Sandra's shoulder, a gesture of support that spoke volumes. Victoria watched the simple interaction, suddenly understanding how true friendship and genuine class needed no designer labels or grand displays. "You mentioned knowing celebrities," Keanu continued, his voice carrying that distinctive thoughtful tone his fans adored. "But I've been in Hollywood long enough to know that real stars, the ones who've truly earned their success, rarely feel the need to prove themselves to anyone. Sandy here has won an Oscar, multiple Golden Globes, and has starred in films that have earned billions. Yet she's never lost touch with what matters most, treating everyone with dignity." The other customers in the store had abandoned any pretense of shopping, openly watching the scene unfold. A young girl, probably no more than 12, clutched her mother's hand and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, that's Miss Congeniality." The innocent comment somehow made Victoria's behavior seem even more shameful. Emily, the sales associate, had found her courage and stepped forward, holding the sapphire necklace Sandra had originally asked to see. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached. "Miss Bullock, would you still like to see this piece?" The simple question carried the weight of an apology for not speaking up sooner. Sandra smiled warmly at Emily, causing the young woman's eyes to fill with tears again, but this time, they were tears of relief. "Thank you, Emily. Actually, I would." She turned to Keanu, including him in the moment. "What do you think? Would it suit Maria?" Victoria watched as Sandra and Keanu discussed the necklace with Emily, their interaction completely natural and kind. Other employees began to emerge from behind counters where they'd been hiding, drawn by the genuine warmth that had replaced the earlier tension. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. Several people held up signs they'd hastily made. "We love you, Sandra," and "Keanu and Sandra, class acts." The impromptu fan gathering had turned the sidewalk into an unofficial red carpet event. A well-known fashion blogger, who had been quietly documenting the entire scene, stepped forward. "Mrs. Montgomery," she addressed Victoria, her phone still recording, "you do realize that Sandra Bullock is famous for her down-to-earth personality? She's been photographed shopping at Target, flying economy, and volunteering at homeless shelters without any publicity. That's why people love her." Victoria's carefully constructed world of luxury and exclusivity was crumbling around her. Every designer item in her store, every premium price tag, every crystal display case suddenly seemed hollow and meaningless compared to the genuine interaction she was witnessing between Sandra, Keanu, and her staff. A distinguished-looking gentleman who had been browsing watches cleared his throat. "I've been coming to this store for 15 years, Victoria," he said quietly. "I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars here. But today, for the first time, I'm ashamed to be associated with this establishment." The impact of his words hit Victoria like physical blows. Each syllable stripped away another layer of her carefully maintained facade. She looked around her store, really looked, and saw it through new eyes. The luxurious surroundings that had once felt like a fortress of exclusivity now seemed like a monument to superficiality. Sandra, still examining the necklace with Keanu, spoke without looking up. "You know what I love about jewelry?" Her voice carried clearly through the hushed store. "It's not about the price tag or the brand. It's about the moments it represents, the celebrations it marks, the love it symbolizes. She held the sapphire necklace up to the light.
My mother taught me that real value isn't in what something costs, but in what it means.
Keanu nodded, adding, and real class isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It's about how you treat people, especially when you think no one important is watching. He looked directly at Victoria as he spoke these last words. The morning sun, now high in the sky, streamed through the windows, catching the sapphire necklace and sending blue reflections dancing across the walls. In that moment, the store seemed transformed. No longer just a temple of luxury, but a space where an invaluable lesson about human dignity was being taught. Victoria Montgomery, who had started her day believing she knew everything about class and value, stood in the midst of this transformation, realizing she had never understood either until now. The turning point wasn't just in her store. It was in her heart. Victoria stepped forward, her designer heels no longer clicking with confidence on the marble floor. Her voice, usually sharp with authority, came out barely above a whisper. Miss Bullock, Mr. Reeves, I don't know what to say. My behavior was inexcusable. Sandra turned from the jewelry case, the sapphire necklace still catching the light in her hands. Her expression remained gentle, but her words carried weight. You know, Victoria, today wasn't just about me. How many other people have walked through those doors and faced the same judgment? How many dreams or special moments have been crushed because they didn't meet your standards of what success should look like? The other customers murmured in agreement. A woman in the corner spoke up. She refused to show my daughter engagement rings last month because she thought we couldn't afford them. My daughter left in tears. Her voice shook with emotion. We'd been saving for 2 years. Keanu stepped closer to Victoria, his presence both calming and commanding. The thing about prejudice, he said quietly, is that it doesn't just hurt the person you're judging. It diminishes everyone involved, including you. Victoria's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her growing distress. She looked around her store, at the employees who couldn't meet her eyes, at the customers who were sharing their own stories of mistreatment, at the crowd still growing outside the windows. I've spent so many years, Victoria's voice cracked, believing that luxury meant exclusivity, that my job was to keep people out rather than welcome them in. She reached up to wipe away a tear, smudging her expensive mascara. Sandra placed the necklace back in Emily's hands and approached Victoria. It's never too late to change, she said softly. To see people for who they are, not what they're wearing or how much money they might spend. The security guard, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly removed his badge. Mrs. Montgomery, I can't be part of this anymore. I was hired to protect the store, not to intimidate people based on their appearance. Outside, the crowd had begun chanting Sandra's name, mixed with calls for Victoria to apologize. The situation was spiraling beyond the walls of the luxury boutique, becoming a moment that would likely live forever on social media. You have a choice now, Keanu added, his voice carrying that philosophical tone his fans loved. You can either learn from this moment and create real change, or you can continue believing that the price of someone's clothes determines their worth. Victoria looked at Sandra, really looked at her for the first time, not at her clothes or her casual appearance, but at the person beneath. She saw the grace, the dignity, the genuine kindness that no designer label could ever provide. In that moment, something shifted in Victoria's understanding of true value. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny stars. The same light that had earlier exposed every crease in Sandra's hoodie now seemed to spotlight the truth about real class and character. Victoria straightened her shoulders, smoothed her designer suit, and faced Sandra with newfound humility. I owe you more than just an apology, she began, her voice steady despite her emotional state. I owe an apology to everyone I've ever judged, dismissed, or made feel unwelcome in this store. Sandra watched quietly as Victoria turned to address her employees and the customers still present. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor, marking the passage of time and transformation. From this moment forward, Victoria announced, this store will operate differently. No more assumptions. No more judgments. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, regardless of what they're wearing or how much they might spend. Emily, still holding the sapphire necklace, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Montgomery, there's something you should know. Miss Bullock comes in here often, always dressed casually. She's bought jewelry for countless charity auctions, but she always asks us not to make a fuss. She's one of our biggest supporters of our annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. Not only had she judged Sandra Bullock wrongly today, but she'd been oblivious to her presence and generosity for years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the store. Keanu, who had maintained his calm presence throughout, shared his own perspective. You know what I've learned in my years in Hollywood? The truly great ones, the ones who've achieved real success, they never forget where they came from. They don't need to prove anything to anyone. The crowd outside had grown quiet, pressing against the windows to witness this moment of transformation. Victoria walked to the store's entrance and, with trembling hands, opened the doors. "Please," she gestured to the gathered crowd, "come in. All of you." As people tentatively filed into the store, Victoria continued her revelation. "For too long, I've confused price tags with value, designer labels with worth. Today, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves taught me that true luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about making everyone feel valued." Sandra smiled warmly. Her earlier humiliation transformed into a powerful teaching moment. "Sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be found in a display case," she offered. "They're in how we treat each other, in the moments we choose kindness over judgment." The store, now filled with a mix of casual tourists and designer-clad Beverly Hills residents, had become a space of unexpected unity. Victoria moved through the crowd, personally apologizing to those she'd previously dismissed or disrespected. "From today," Victoria announced, her voice carrying through the store, "this space will honor the true meaning of class. Not the kind you wear, but the kind you carry in your heart." She turned to Sandra and Keanu. "Thank you for teaching me this invaluable lesson." The security guard, who had earlier contemplated quitting, put his badge back on with a new sense of purpose. His job would now be to ensure everyone felt welcome, not to intimidate or exclude. As the morning drew to a close, Victoria made one final gesture. She carefully removed the exclusive clientele-only sign that had hung in the window for 20 years. The simple act drew applause from the gathered crowd, symbolizing the end of an era of exclusion and the beginning of something more meaningful. Sandra picked up the sapphire necklace once more, this time with Victoria herself assisting. The interaction was different now, no longer tainted by prejudice but marked by mutual respect. "I think Maria will love this," Sandra said softly. "Not because of its price tag, but because it will remind her of this day when judgments were transformed into understanding." The lesson that echoed through Cartier's Beverly Hills boutique that morning went far beyond luxury retail. It spoke to the heart of human dignity, the true nature of class, and the transformative power of humility. Victoria Montgomery's store would never be the same, and neither would she. In the days that followed, the transformation of Cartier's Beverly Hills boutique became a powerful story that spread far beyond Rodeo Drive. Victoria Montgomery's public apology and commitment to change went viral, touching hearts and challenging assumptions about class and worth across social media platforms. The store itself underwent a visible transformation. The imposing security guard now greeted every customer with a warm smile, regardless of their attire. Emily, the young sales associate who had tried to intervene, was promoted to manager of customer experience, tasked with ensuring everyone felt welcome and valued. 1 week after the incident, Sandra returned to the store, again in her casual attire. This time, she brought along a group of teenagers from a local youth program she quietly supported. Victoria, fighting back tears, watched as Sandra taught the young people about the artistry of fine jewelry, not its price tags. The store's annual Children's Hospital fundraiser that year broke all previous records. Keanu Reeves made a surprise appearance, and Victoria matched every donation personally. The event became less about displaying wealth and more about sharing blessings with those in need. Local business schools began using the incident as a case study in customer service and ethical business practices. Victoria herself was invited to speak at several conferences, sharing her journey from exclusivity to inclusivity. Her honest reflections on her previous behavior and commitment to change resonated with luxury retailers worldwide. The Victoria Rule became unofficial policy in high-end stores across Beverly Hills. Judge not by appearance, but by character. Other boutiques began removing their intimidating signs and retraining their staff to welcome all customers with equal respect. Sandra and Keanu's friendship continued to inspire. They occasionally stopped by the store together, always in casual clothes, always treating everyone with the same warmth and respect. Their presence served as a reminder that true class had nothing to do with designer labels or diamond necklaces. Victoria kept a small framed photo on her desk, Sandra in her Nike hoodie, standing beside Victoria in her Chanel suit, both smiling genuinely at the camera. Below it, she added a simple quote, "Real luxury is treating everyone like they belong." The sapphire necklace that sparked the incident became known as the humility piece among staff members. It found its way to Maria's wedding, where it symbolized not just celebration, but transformation. Victoria attended the wedding as Sandra's guest, a friendship born from an uncomfortable truth and a valuable lesson. 1 year later, Cartier's Beverly Hills boutique was voted most welcoming luxury store by local shoppers. The award, displayed prominently near the entrance, shared space with a new sign that read, "Everyone's welcome here, just as they are."